What do we think about the
Is
fact
this
that,
is this where you're going?
yes, about the fact that Jokic has seemingly been pushing behind the scenes to get Russell Westbrook on the team?
Look at that graphic.
This
That
is
explains
courtesy of
it.
Dan Favale on Twitter. He's always on it with the memes. I personally was a little bit surprised, not shocked or anything, because I know about the, acquaintanceship at least between Jokic and Russ and the mutual respect there between those two players. But the reason that it surprised me a little bit is mostly because Jokic has, from all accounts, uh, mostly like to keep himself like out of these discussions, and let the team do their jobs. He doesn't interfere with the coaches too much. He doesn't interfere with the front office too much. So yeah, pushing for a very specific player to get on the team is a departure from that. So I find it interesting. What was your reaction to hearing this? Well, because I know you didn't even know that this was the
Yeah.
case until this morning, right?
Yeah, no, not until this morning. I was like very busy, but
Will
yeah, I
woke
was
up in a daze doing that.
Yeah.
yeah. I had seen people like joking about how, the Lakers traded KCP for Westbrook in that trade, and how now we're losing KCP and thinking of adding Westbrook. Totally different circumstance, albeit in
Yeah, that
different
was ludicrous.
expectation. Yeah,
Yeah.
really bad trade on their part. So I was just laughing at the fact that that connection now exists kind of for the Nuggets, but obviously he wouldn't. It's not the same type of thing. So I'm grateful for that, and we do need a backup point guard. So I don't know if I'm just like accepting it because I'm a Nuggets fan and just trying to look for the best because we haven't signed a vet point guard, and that's one of the biggest things I wanted to happen in the offseason besides drafting some good players. Just because we saw that was one of the biggest reasons why we were struggling, just that lack of ball handler alongside Jamal in the second unit. And yeah, I wanted a really good option for that. I'm still like thinking about Russ because I saw him a lot on the Lakers and that was a kind of bad fit. I thought he'd stay with the Clippers because that was a pretty good situation for him and he seemed
And it
well
seemed like
liked.
they really liked him, that the coaching staff in particular, Ty Lue really liked him, really pushed
Yeah.
for them to bring him back this past season.
But it seems like they're already committed to moving him and figuring out something else. They who did they just sign?
Right before we started recording, the news about Chris Dunn going to the Clippers came out, and that seemed like, okay, this is confirmation that like the Clippers are probably going to be moving on from Russ. There probably won't be too many roadblocks to him coming to the Nuggets because the Clippers have basically a new backup point guard now.
That
Um,
one hurt me.
Yeah,
yeah.
that
That
was
got
one.
me.
That was the option I was really hoping for, but I didn't see any like suggestions around that.
Yeah.
Uh,
I actually was hearing that he might go to Phoenix, so this isn't quite as bad, but it's not us.
yeah, did you have something in mind for that position, CT, that was more like defensive focused as the point guard vet rather than an offensively focused guard?
Yeah, I wanted DeLon Wright as my number one option. He went to the Bucks today, and he signed for the minimum. So it's like the Nuggets could have had him, which is it's a blow.
Jeez.
So it's
But
confirmed that he signed for the minimum? I
he
haven't
said
seen
like
the
3.3 million because he's a
Okay,
10-year
so the
vet.
number is out there now. Yeah.
Yeah. So that would have been my number one target for Denver because he, had the versatility to play with solely, Jokic with Murray on the bench, or he could have played beside Murray as well. Um, so Dunn and him and Wright were my two guys. I wrote in my piece after the year that I thought would have been good fits for the Nuggets, just because I think, Dunn obviously his offense is hit or miss and the shooting is a bit problematic, but I think there's like a level from him to Russ. I think when it comes to that, and my thinking with Russ is that as a coach, I like to. And I coach middle school, so it's not like we're getting too, involved in spacing and schematics and things like that. But one thing I do like as a coach is having some space. You know what I mean? Having shooters out there on the floor and people that can kind of put pressure on the defense. And I think Russ could do that in certain ways, right? Transition. He's pretty good attacking with a full head of steam, into the paint. But I just see how teams guarded him in the playoffs, and it's like teams are just backing off of him like Ben Simmons, and it's the Nuggets at this point for me in the Jokic era. It's like I never thought we'd be at a point where I'm concerned about the offense in the Jokic era
Yeah.
compared to the
Yeah.
defense, and
Yeah.
um,
Part of it's
uh,
like at the point when the team was like struggling on the overall the most roster wise, they had all these ball handlers. So you didn't really have to think about that, like that as a weakness or as a deficit or something to massively upgrade. But
Right.
they've transformed the roster over the last 2 years since Calvin Booth took over, basically.
I think it was good calculus by Booth. I know a lot of people are criticizing him over the past couple of days, and there's been a lot of talk about him tanking the team and things like that. But um, I've kind of talked myself a little bit into Russ, a tiny bit. I don't know how he really plays with Jokic, to be honest with you. If there's a guy maybe that could make it work, maybe it's Jokic. But if you're playing Gordon and Russell together, I don't think that's going to work. I think you probably have to have a lot of spacing.
Right.
If you play Murray and Russ, I think Russ actually at this point is a pretty good defender, on the ball at least. He's pretty physical. What is he, 6'4"? So
Good
not the
size.
smallest guy in the
He's
world.
strong.
Very strong. I think he could scale up a little bit too, guarding some wings in that aspect as well. So, some wings. But I do think defensively he'll hold up well. And I think with the bench, they were just lacking a ton of like offensive juice, right? And I think if we see Russ kind of be more of a facilitator type, I think maybe it'll work in the regular season. And then once we see the playoffs, that might be a different story, which again, then the Nuggets have a lot of more unplayable guys in the playoffs, it could be a problem. But I've talked myself into it maybe working with the bench a little bit, because if I put it out there today, if you have a bench of Russ, Strawther, Watson, Vlatko, and Holmes, I think that's pretty good, because Vlatko and Holmes could stretch the floor. Strawther, at least hypothetically, is a good shooter, but the thing with Strawther is he puts up volume, right? He's a volume shooter, and that matters compared to the percentage. And Watson, obviously, I think is more hit or miss, but I do like that lineup of having a couple other shooters out there, and you can kind of mix and match in the front court as well. So I think maybe it could work. I think next to Murray, it could work a little bit, trying to play Murray off the ball, get him some more catch and shoot looks. Running him off of staggers as well. So I think there's an option too. And I think too, just kind of to wrap up the point, I think, Westbrook having the athleticism that he does so at his age matters. The Nuggets are just kind of lacking a lot of pop in the backcourt, next to Murray. So,
Yeah,
Russ
sure.
he's still a great athlete, a great downhill driver. I think playing him next to a lob threat like Holmes would work really well. And I think, him and Holmes in the pick and roll could be good too, because Holmes could pass. He could, stretch the floor as well. Could put Russ in the dunker spot too sometimes. So I think there's worse options. I'm still skeptical it works in the playoffs, but at least in the regular season, I think that it could be an upgrade over Reggie.
Yeah, since we're just on this point, I'll ask about Jalen Pickett. And because Calvin Booth, we'd been talking about how he may just envision Jalen Pickett being a backup point guard and trying to clear space for him with moving Reggie. We still haven't signed Russell Westbrook, but that's the heavy rumor. I don't think even Calvin Booth would deny that we need an additional point guard and ball handler. But would he be worried about how that would affect Jalen Pickett's playing time? Like, would it cause more stress with Malone? Or do you just think we have enough room to have multiple guards like this, whether to stagger with Jamal or not? And that's just something we have to do.
Yeah, I think that's probably with Pickett. I think it shouldn't be kind of in the equation. I think just because he's a second round player, I know he signed to a multi-year deal on the roster. Admittedly, I know we spoke about it last pod. I'm a bit lower on Pickett than a lot of other people. So I do think that they need a veteran guy to play next to Murray in certain instances, try to carry the bench as well. And it's something against Pickett. I just think he's probably too inexperienced at this point. And again, he's a second rounder, so I think people are really like expecting a lot from him. So I don't think it's really his fault, but I think Booth probably has to acknowledge that they need another veteran backup, whether that's Russ or somebody else who else is out there right now. I think that having too many of those young guys is definitely problematic, especially now that your Brown's probably going to be in the starting lineup, and now you're going to play Strawther, Holmes, and Watson. That's, you add another rookie to the equation compared to last year where you're playing three of those guys, three young guys. Now you're playing four. So
they're not going to be rookies anymore, except Duran. So
that
at least there's that.
Yeah, that is true. And I think Vlatko coming back will help as well. He's a veteran. He knows how to play. A good shooter, pretty good passer as well. Like,
pretty versatile. Like,
yeah, he's versatile.
He can play with a lot of different players, right?
Yep. And I think too, you could play him in 5-out lineups. If you want to play Strawther, you could play in place of Brown, right? You could play Strawther in that. You could play Vlatko instead of AG, with Mike at the 3. I think that's at least an offensively good kind of look there. So But yeah, just to conclude about the Pickett point, I think he's probably not in the plan unless he has like a dynamic summer league. I don't think he's in the plan as far as like being like a rotation thought. Maybe just a third string going into the year.
Yeah, Grace, really quick. When I heard about the Russ news and I was talking to myself into it, I definitely was like getting sold in my mind on his rim pressure and then also maybe playing like as a pick and roll threat with Holmes and the rebounding, stuff like that. The shooting is a big concern. Where did you kind of end up on this? Were you like more for it or were you just slowly growing on it? Or where are you at?
So I've like joked online a fair bit whenever the idea of I think like Russ has come up and CP3 has also come up when one of these like used to be like really really like MVP caliber point guards, but they're really old now, and they have like Russ in particular has some baggage off court wise or not basketball related as well, right? You have to worry about chemistry and things like that. Is he going to be willing to come off the bench and things like that? But I actually think it's way better than what we've had, particularly this past year. I agree with you about the rim pressure. Even if the pull-up shooting is really tough, he is really good at pressuring the rim, even when guys are going under on his screens. And he's really good at finding the big in pick and roll, which, at first I was like, I'm really worried about his finishing at the rim because it's not great, but it's not like Reggie's was amazing either. But I think that like Russ is like a point guard. He's really good at finding people, both in pick and roll when it's like a drive and kick situation as well. I think that he actually hit his stride for most of the season with the Clippers coming off of the bench because he did kind of find that niche of let me come off the bench. I'm going to push pace. We're going to drive and kick. I'm going to pressure the paint and, try to create some easy stuff for, the rest of the guys on the floor. And so I actually really like the idea because I can see how it can work. It's more a question of, is that going to be how he plays consistently? Is he going to stay consistently engaged on the floor? Things like that. And the fact of the matter is we do need another ball handler, right? Like it's not like there's someone else on the floor for the most part that we want the ball in their hands because we have all these Jokic ball players that play so well off the ball. And, we're facing this like dearth of ball handling at the moment in terms of primary initiation, primary creation. So I actually don't think it's a bad idea. I do see ways basketball wise that it can, pose its challenges, like CT says, especially with the spacing. But Russ is still incredibly athletic, especially for someone his age, but even for just for an NBA player. And I think that he could, fit in if we're deciding to like play him in the dunker spot, some possessions, things like that. He's a really good offensive rebounder, even if he has to switch out onto like a bigger wing or even like a center sometimes. Like he'll beat those guys to the boards, even if he kind of like gets got positionally or something like that. So I think that, like you said, there are worse options, and I'm warming to the idea. The one other, I think, I don't know if it's a big positive, but it's just something to consider how this whole season felt like a real slog, right? And I've already talked about how Russ is this player who he can be someone that comes onto the floor and injects a lot of energy into how the team is playing and completely change the tone of a game, for better or worse. But in addition to that, like Yoke is asking for him, apparently, right? That's what's reported is that Yoke's been pushing for this behind the scenes. And I don't think it would be the worst thing in the world to have someone who Jokic is asking for, who consistently brings that energy every single night, even when we're playing like the Wizards on a Tuesday. So I'm kind of like, I don't know how this is going to go, but I am also worried if we don't do anything this off season. So
Yeah.
rocking a hard place.
I think Duran and Westbrook would bring more energy and freshness to like the whole group. And that would be really nice. And also DeAndre Jordan was like reportedly like talking to the front office about what Russ like might
That's
bring, because
true.
he played with him, I think, in LA on the Lakers for that little bit. Obviously, I hope we don't post this and like Russ, it's already over. He signed with someone else or traded somewhere and we're not getting him after talking about this. But the moral of this story is we need someone like this, some archetype like this, vet point guard. The options are dwindling at this point, so hopefully we have some news soon. But you want to move to our starting point guard and talk about that?
Yes. So the other news that came, there was a lot that came in succession on the day of the second round of the draft. We got news that KCP was probably going to go. Now we know that he's gone. We also found out that the Nuggets and Jamal are apparently working on a max extension that is expected to be signed basically as soon as Jamal is extension eligible on July 6th. Were you at all surprised by that news, CT?
Yeah, I think I was on, the first show. I think I said that I would kind of think that he'd wait until the season started, or he'd
Mhm.
go into free agency and test it then. I personally, I think it's a good move to kind of get the money when it's presented to you. Because you just never know what's going to happen. So I think that's a kind of a good thing, and I think it's good for the Nuggets as well. We're kind of seeing all the narratives out there that the Nuggets are cheaping out and not paying people. So I'm happy that the Nuggets are keeping Murray and Jokic together for the long term. It seems like so. I was maybe a little bit surprised, but also pretty ecstatic that it seems like it's going to get done.
Yeah, if Jamal signs this deal, it'll take him into 1 year after Jokic's current contract. So, we'll see what the team looks like then. But I hope he signs it. Like I thought that this is what would happen, that the team would present it. I thought Jamal would sign mostly because again, his agent should tell him to sign. But we'll see what happens. I know there's like a wee bit of consternation at the moment that we haven't gotten the announcement that he's intending to sign yet. Um, but those initial reports about the extension, it sounded like the information was coming from both sides, like Jamal's whatever agent
Yeah.
and the team, and that it's expected that he's going to sign. So I don't know what more news people necessarily want to hear about that. If he doesn't sign it after July 6th, then we can have some questions about like, oh, is he going to try to go for all NBA next year? I don't know. We'll discuss that if that we'll cross that bridge when we come to. I'm
Yeah.
incredibly tired right now.
No worries.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad Jamal's back. I'm sad that KCP is gone. So I guess we could dive into losing him. And
Biggest story of the offseason for the Nuggets.
yeah, I was leading up to this. I think a lot of fans were worried all last season that we may not keep him. And there weren't a lot of reports coming out about an extension getting done. We probably figured he would opt out. And then it was a matter of figuring out how to bring him back, which we couldn't do. Calvin Booth had many opportunities to talk about this, and he basically vaulted CB as the replacement, which I'm now slowly rationalizing myself into being excited for, just because this is the reality we're into. But I definitely wanted KCP to stay. What are your thoughts on this, CT, and how confident are you in Christian Brown?
It's a bit sad that KCP is leaving, just because he was a key cog on the championship team. First in franchise history, and as a fan, all these years, you kind of yearn for that championship, and they brought in KCP, and he had that experience, and he brought that to the table, and he was a very integral part of that championship team. So I always have fond memories and great things to say about him. But yeah, no, it's the reality now that there was some talk online that of some of the writing that I saw that KCP kind of wanted to be closer to home as he's kind of his career is getting into the later stages. So that could have been a factor as well. Tony Jones and I spoke on Twitter, like in like on the timeline. He said that the Nuggets matched the offer for him. So I guess take that for what what it's worth. So it seems like maybe the Nuggets tried to kind of give him a competitive offer, but he went to the Magic. But yeah, I was the Christian Brown guy in the draft 2 years ago. Big advocate, to kind of draft him, and it's his time to shine now. And I think his trajectory, I put on the timeline the other day, his trajectory I think is very impressive. 4-star recruit in high school, not a top 100 guy. Then he goes to Kansas, and he kind of works his way up, right? And Kansas is a program that has so many great players, right? Ochai Agbaji and so many wings that they had that CB had to leap the hierarchy of, and he was a all Big 12 player and won a national championship for them, and I think he's on the trajectory that he's gonna like that starting is the next logical step in his career, and I think KCP brings, not KCP, I think Brown brings a lot to the table that KCP lacked. Uh, a lot more speed, I think, end to end. I think as far as an offensive rebounder, Brown is better in that aspect. I think Brown's a bit bigger as well. I think he plays bigger than KCP. He's more physical, but also too, I think as far as a screen navigator and things like that, Brown is lacking in that area. But I do think he can get better. This
Hmm.
is someone who hasn't played starters minutes, yet. So I think this is going to be the first step for him to see, how that fares. And I'm of the belief that Brown's next step in his career is becoming a starter. And there are some things that he brings to the table, like I said, that are uh, pretty good as far as adding to what the starters lacked. As far as that positional height, better. I think they're going to really be great on the boards, especially where they took a step back last year in that department. And Brown's shooting got better last year as well. Albeit on limited volume, but I do think that he's not going to be a guy that you can just leave open and dare him to shoot, because I think he's someone who can actually get into the paint and make decisions and kick out to different players and things like that. So I'm optimistic about it. I think KCP obviously is a better player right now, no doubt. More versatile offensively. Brings a lot more different kind of aspects defensively as well. But I do think Brown, at least at this point for me, seeing him in the playoffs against Anthony Edwards, I have the belief that the starting lineup is going to be okay in the regular season at least. And
Hmm.
we kind of saw that lineup really. And if you look at the data, obviously it was kind of limited. They were really good in that span. And we saw Booth kind of mention that as well, as trying to maybe, deflect from KCP leaving. But I
Yeah.
think it's going to be good. I think it's going to be good, but there are some questions, when it gets to the playoffs, how is Brown going to fare? Is he going to be someone who, record scratches possessions? That's my biggest issue with Brown, is that he's
Hmm.
not very decisive with the ball when it comes to attacking closeouts. And he should be, though, because when he's attacking in a straight line, he could really put people on a poster, and he's great at,
Yeah.
dunking on people, like
Yeah.
he really is, and I think that's hopefully this summer, him working with his trainers, and hopefully he can kind of improve that part of his game where attacking closeouts and making decisions on the move and things like that. But defensively, I think Brown defensively is going to be fit right in. I don't think the Nuggets are going to lose a beat on that end of the floor. And he was tabbed for me when I was scouting him as the best closeout defender in his class, and I think that's kind of held up as we've seen, in the league this year. So uh,
Let's get him as one of the best
yeah,
closeout attackers now.
Yeah.
listen, I'm all for it.
Actually, that what you said before about the hesitation in attacking closeouts and what he could do if he like trusted his athleticism, it reminded me of, I don't remember if it was the game 80 against the Wolves and he had that poster over Rudy, or
Mhm.
if it was another game where he had this ridiculous like transition lob. I think it was like a transition lob dunk. It might have been against the Jazz or something. But in the post game, uh, Christian was talking about how, and I think Peyton also spoke after this game because they had both been like really good in whatever game it was. They talked about how Peyton is always telling Christian that like he's like really sneaky athletic and like he can really get up there if he like wants to. And I think that's the thing is like I see all these tools that Christian has. He's got this size, he's got strength. He doesn't have like elite burst, but I think that he can like you say attack closeouts more effectively than he does if he didn't hesitate so much. But it's just about like getting to a point where he trusts those tools and knows how to like has the feel to fully like maximize them, right?
Yeah, I made a point earlier that last season there was a lot of differing opinions on him and whether he was kind of in a sophomore slump. And I think CT, you were the one of the people still arguing like Christian Brown's been fine. Like it's not like he's been terrible. A
Mhm.
lot of people were critical of him because he wasn't popping as much as he did in his rookie season where he was surprising everybody. And I think people had huge expectations for him. now he's going to have more expectations because he's a starter. But I think part of the problem with his season last season was that we weren't quite sure exactly how to play him in what lineups. And then when Jamal goes down, that shifts the hierarchy and then it kind of complicates it more. And like, what should his role be and what should he focus on? And Malone even had like a point in the season where he was like, I need to find Christian ways for him to like be himself and be impactful again, because maybe they were focusing on the wrong thing. Like maybe he was focusing way too much on spot ups or something like that, and not just being aggressive and attacking the boards or stuff like that. This time, I'm hoping that since he's in the starters and he's playing with Jokic and Jamal and these very good decision makers, very elite basketball players, that the reads that he's going to have to make are going to be a little more simple. Like when he needs to attack closeouts, when he needs to pass, whatever it is that he needs to do, I'm hoping it's going to be easier for him just because it's just more clear with who's supposed to be doing what rather than when he was playing with the bench. But I don't know if like him watching KCP on tape on KCP playing with the starters can help him at all. I know they're not quite the same player. They have some different skill sets, but I think like he's in a position to succeed with Malone and like Jokic. Like Jokic doesn't need four other players to make him succeed. Like he's the one who makes everyone else around him succeed. So maybe that's why I'm like optimistic, because I believe so much in Jokic. But
Yeah, I have actually two more points I wanted to add, before maybe moved on. I think it's interesting as well. If you look at, the last kind of starters for at that two guard spot for the Nuggets, right? You see a Will Barton was more of an offensively dynamic player than defensively, more of a playmaker on that end, where you could kind of put Jamal off the ball and Will could play make in that aspect. And then fast forward now, if KCP is more of a spot up guy, could take a dribble or two and get to a spot, but obviously more potent defensively. And I think Brown is a guy where he's different than both of those guys, right? He's more of a slasher, really good rebounder. I think defensively too, like he's with more like kind of ample opportunity now. We're going to see more of his his defense really shine on that end of the floor. And I'm sorry, I think as well. I think playing beside Watson was a bit of a struggle for him last year. Those lineups were not really not really great spacing wise. So I think that him playing with the starters and away from Watson, I think that might be a good kind of more proper fit for both units now.
yeah, that's a good point. He also may be more durable than, I mean, KCP was pretty durable too. There are times where you get some tweaks, little injuries, but CB's pretty young. Hopefully he can play the whole season and stay healthy.
I want to talk a little bit about just a couple of the teeny tiny moves that have either happened for the Nuggets or haven't, or like on the way to happening, right? So I don't remember on our last episode if it had yet been announced that the Nuggets were probably going to bring Vlatko back after they declined his team option. Is that right? And they're probably going to sign him on a minimum. That's not official yet. So I'm actually still waiting on that news because I need to keep track of all of this salary cap stuff. But the first thing that happened on the day of free agency, Nuggets wise anyway, was DeAndre Jordan is back. And there was a very mixed response to DeAndre Jordan being back. I think fans are basically upset about like 5 other things about the roster. And so when that was announced, like the morning that free agency was going to start, all of that sort of anger, well, not all of it because there was more to come, but a lot of it was being channeled into responding to like, why is he taking up a roster spot? Why are we spending that kind of money? There was some misunderstanding of the difference between how much of the cap is taken up by a vet minimum versus how much money the player actually gets. And I just wanted to talk about it a little bit because I think DJ has been really great for the team as a locker room presence. He is really close with Jokic as well. Will, you talked earlier in the show about how he is perhaps also behind the scenes advocating for Russ and what he could bring to the team. And he's taking on that like Udonis Haslem type of role. However, now that we know that KCP's gone, we have 2 roster spots left if you sort of take one off for, you just reserve one for Vlatko. You have 2 roster spots left for veterans. Obviously if DJ weren't on the team, we could potentially sign somebody else who could play. What would you say to somebody who was trying to make that argument to you about like, well, we have all these people that aren't playing. Why sign another?
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting. Daj for me, I think is a good vet for the team. Really good leader in the locker room as well. I think at times he showed that he's playable last year. Not on an every night basis, but I do think sometimes he is playable. He was a lob threat, decent passer, pretty good athlete still at his age, which is pretty impressive. So,
You
but
can get
yeah, I
up
mean,
there.
he can definitely, and I think I put it there yesterday as well on the timeline that having Zeke, Dayron, Jokic, and DJ is kind of like a lot of bigs. So I wouldn't be surprised if maybe Zeke does get moved soon, or something like that. But because I don't
I'd
know at this
only be
point, they're going to
surprised
sign.
because I'd be shocked if they figured out a way to do it.
Yeah, maybe we'll get some team. Maybe Mr. Weaver will take on Zeke, but we'll see what happens there. But yeah, I think it's kind of tough because the Nuggets are basically tanking a couple spots on their roster still at this point. If you look at like a Tyson or a Pickett and DJ as well,
Yeah.
so it's kind of tough. But I'm indifferent to him being back or not.
Yeah, this was like the one thing that I knew was going to happen this offseason. Everything else was pretty up in the air in my mind. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share on YouTube. Hit the notification bell. Leave us a review. We're on Spotify, Amazon Music, and now Apple Music as well. Finally got that done. That's awesome. And just, always remember, winning is fun and losing sucks, especially losing the off season because those only come around once a year.